Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the hardest creatures to kill in Magic. When this creature pops up on the other side of the table, you know it's going to take a lot to take them out. And sometimes even when you do take them out, they're coming back for more. Now there are many different ways that make certain creatures hard to kill, and I tried to split these up into categories as best as I could. So with all that said, let's jump into it. Trolls can be notoriously tough creatures to kill in Magic, and perhaps no troll is harder to kill than Thrun the Last Troll. Thrun can't be countered, has Hexproof, and can regenerate for 1 and a green. So your opponents can't stop you from getting it out, they can't target it, and you can also regenerate it for cheap. And then Troll Ascetic is kind of a mini Thrun, but still incredibly hard to deal with. Basically, it's a smaller Thrun that doesn't have that can't be countered clause. And then Monster Ridge Troll is tough in a different way because it says if it would be destroyed, regenerate it. So even if your opponents kill it and you don't have any mana up, it's not going away. Now obviously any of these can be killed with a board wipe that basically says cannot be regenerated, but still these are really tough to deal with. And obviously those types of board wipes can't deal with indestructibility, so Impervious Great Worm is gonna be fine. There are a good amount of creatures out there with Indestructible, but Impervious Great Worm is especially hard to deal with since it's a 16/16. So even if your opponent's got something like a Toxic Deluge, they're gonna have to pay 16 life to deal with this. And gods like Purphoros can be even tougher to deal with, because Purphoros is indestructible and a lot of the times it's not even a creature. So that Toxic Deluge won't work on it when it's just an enchantment. Next up, let's talk about Sigarda, Host of Herons, which is also incredibly hard to deal with. She has Hexproof, and spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. So your opponents can't target Sigarda, and your opponent's Edict effects can't get to it either. And speaking of not being able to target, your opponents are especially going to have trouble with something like Iridescent Angel. It's got protection from all colors, so there aren't many things that can deal with it outside of board wipes, and even in the case of board wipes, red board wipes don't work. Your opponent's Blasphemous Act might deal 13 damage to all creatures, but that damage doesn't matter to Iridescent Angel. And some similar cards to this one with some slight requirements are Pristine Angel and Etched Champion. As long as Pristine Angel is untapped, it has protection from artifacts and from all colors. So now even artifacts can't deal with this. Now if it is tapped, as long as you cast a spell, you can untap it for free. And then Etched Champion has protection from all colors as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. If you're playing with a deck that's running Etched Champion, this is probably going to be a pretty easy requirement for you to meet. Next up, a card that is incredibly hard to deal with for multiple reasons, but not in Commander because it's banned, is Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. First off, it can't be countered. Secondly, when you cast a spell, you get an extra turn after this one, so your opponents are going to have to wait to do anything at sorcery speed. Then it also has protection from colored spells. And finally, if your opponents actually do somehow kill this and put it into your graveyard, then you get to shuffle your graveyard into your library. So yeah, I'm pretty glad I don't have to try to deal with this one in Commander. But Progenitus is still in Commander, and it's got protection from everything. Now, protection from everything is pretty fantastic, though it doesn't save it from board wipes aside from red board wipes. But again, even if your opponents deal with this, it gets shuffled into your library. Now, out of all these tough creatures, perhaps the 2 that are the hardest to deal with are Fleecemane Lion and Elusive Tormentor. Fleecemane Lion has, as long as it's monstrous, it has Hexproof and Indestructible. So it does require you to get it out and pay its monstrosity cost, but once you do that, this is incredibly hard to deal with. The combination of not being able to target it and then also having indestructibility makes it so that this is incredibly hard to take out. Elusive Tormentor is somewhat similar in that it doesn't start off as hard to deal with, but by paying 1 and discarding a card, you transform it into Insidious Mist. And then at that point, like Fleecemane Lion, it also has Hexproof and Indestructible, and it can't block and can't be blocked. Again, the combination of Indestructibility and Hexproof is absolutely brutal. But there are still some creatures coming up that I think are even tougher to take out. So let's move on to my next category, which I'm calling I'm Outta Here, and let's start off with Aetherling. Now, Aetherling was one of my favorite cards when I came back to Magic with my standard Turbo Fog deck, and yeah, I was one of those players. Turbo Fog for life! Anyways, just by paying a blue, you exile Aetherling, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So for just 1 mana, you can get Aetherling out of danger. Someone targets him with a kill spell, blink him. Someone casts a board wipe, blink him. Someone does absolutely anything to try to take it out, and you blink it. That delayed return makes it so that it's dodging pretty much anything, which is especially useful again against board wipes. Oh, and you can also make it unblockable and pump its power or toughness or whatever you really need to do to keep this thing alive and keep it hitting hard. Some somewhat similar creatures to this one are Argent Sphinx and Ghost Council over Zova. Now, like Etched Champion, Argent Sphinx does need Metalcraft to actually do that exile effect like Aetherlings. But again, if you've got a deck that's running this card, you're most likely going to have 3 artifacts in play. And then Ghost Council over Zova requires you to pay 1 and sacrifice a creature to do the same. So if you've got some fodder creatures lying around, you're going to be fine. Again, exiling and coming back later is a lot harder to deal with than bringing it back right away. As long as you've got mana up, it is nearly impossible, aside from things like split-second cards, to take these out. 2 other similar cards that have that bounce effect are Enerode Brushhopper and Nezahal Primal Tide. Brushhopper has discard 2 cards, exile it, return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So as long as you've got cards in your hand, you're going to be fine. Now, Nezahal takes this a step further for multiple reasons. First off, can't be countered, so yeah, that's even harder to deal with right away. Now, like the Brushhopper, you have to discard cards, but in this case, you have to discard 3, so that is 1 more. But Nezahal can draw you an incredible amount of cards because it has whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you draw a card. On top of that, you've got no maximum hand size, so yeah, this is incredibly hard, if not impossible, to deal with. Speaking of incredibly hard, if not impossible to deal with, there's Norrin the Wary. Norrin is Magic's biggest scaredy cat of all time. He has, whenever a player casts a spell or a creature attacks, exile Norrin the Wary. Return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So if anyone essentially does anything, this guy goes away and comes back later when it's safe. So target removal won't get him, and board wipes definitely won't get him either. You basically are going to need an activated ability kill or an anti-anthem effect like Elesh Norn to take this out. But now let's move on to some creatures that phase, which is a weird old mechanic. Teferi's Honor Guard and Rainbow Freed have pay blue, phase out. Phase out means that while it's phased out, it's treated as though it doesn't exist. It phases in before you untap during your next untap step. Basically, it pieces out and comes back on your turn. It doesn't exile or come back, it just pretty much is considered to be not there. Until it is there again. Yeah, this mechanic is really weird. Anyway, some last ones in this category I want to tackle are Blinking Spirit and Selenia Dark Angel. Blinking Spirit has pay 0, return it to its owner's hand. So essentially, if anything happens, you just bounce this back to your hand for free. Someone tries to target it, cast a board wipe, use an activated ability to kill it, anything, it's coming back to your hand. And because you can pay 0 as many times as you want, it doesn't matter how many times they target this. Selenia Dark Angel, who is very near and dear to my heart because my life swap deck is very similar, but there is a small cost. To bounce Selenia back to your hand, you need to pay 2 life. Now, there is no mana cost for that, and you're always going to have the ability to do that unless you don't have the life requirement. But again, if you've got the life, you can try to bounce this thing as many times as you want to ensure that it survives whatever your opponents are trying to do to kill Selenia. But next up, we've got some creatures that even when you kill them, they're not quite dead just yet. So in this category that I'm calling Be Right Back, let's start with some things like Phytotitan, Dargoz Reincarnated, and Apocryphite. Yeah, those names are hard to say in a row. Anyways, Phytotitan has, when it dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of their next upkeep. So if you kill it, it's coming back for free. Now, obviously an exile effect can permanently deal with this, but if you've got something like a free sacrifice outlet on the board, good luck trying to get around that. Your opponents try to exile it, you sack it in response, and oh no, it died! Looks like I gotta get it back. Speaking of coming back, Dargoz Reincarnated has, if it would die, instead exile it with 3 egg counters on it. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, if it's exiled with an egg counter on it, remove an egg counter from it. Then if it had no egg counters on it, return to the battlefield. Basically, a delayed Phytotitan, you get it back after 3 turns instead of just 1. In a similar way, Apocryphite says when it dies, exile it with 3 time counters on it and it gains Suspend. So you're not putting it right back into play, but you are casting it and it does gain haste, so it's kind of similar, though it can get countered, but still incredibly hard to deal with. We've also got some creatures that aren't brought back automatically, but they are brought back with a specific condition. Bloodghast has, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, that's a pretty easy requirement to meet in pretty much any kind of game of Magic. And then Nether Trader says, whenever another creature is put into your graveyard from play, you may pay black. If you do, return it from your graveyard to play. So if another one of your creatures dies for just 1 mana, you're getting this back. There are also creatures like Phoenixes that are known for being brought back, though I'm not going to go through all of them, I will go over one. Arc-like Phoenix says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've cast 3 or more instant and sorcery spells this turn, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. For a Spellslinger deck, that's a very easy requirement to meet. And then Vengevine has a similar but different requirement. It says whenever you cast a spell, if it's the second creature spell that you cast this turn, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then we've also got a creature that can be brought back that has absolutely no requirement, though it does cost mana, with Reassembling Skeleton. Simply by paying 1 and a black, it comes back from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So yeah, this little guy is best buddies with aristocrat-style commanders. Now there's also a Magic character that is notorious for being impossible to kill, and that would be Squee. Squee the Immortal says you may cast it from your graveyard or from exile. So basically, no matter how your opponents deal with this, you're going to be able to cast it from wherever it goes. And then Squee Goblin Nabob says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may return Squee Goblin Nabob from your graveyard to your hand. So as long as this one's not exiled, you're getting it back. Next up, there's a somewhat similar card with Endless Cockroaches, which is gonna keep coming back to your hand whenever it dies. So there's no delay on this one, it's just when it dies, you're getting it back. And then there's gods like the Locust guy, which have a small delay because when they die, you return to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So again, your opponents can kill it and kill it again, but it's gonna keep coming back unless they exile it. Now we've already gone through a lot of incredibly hard to kill creatures, and we're not quite done just yet. So let's move on to my last category, which I'm calling technically, and you'll understand what I'm talking about when I get into these cards. Riami First the Fallen and Soul Flayer are not hard to deal with, unless certain things occur. Let me explain. Riami First the Fallen has, if a non-token creature would die, exile that card with a blood counter on it instead. As long as an exiled creature card with a blood counter on it has flying, Riami First the Fallen has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Protection, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So yeah, this card has the potential to have every single one of those keywords. And yeah, notably, if it's got Indestructible, Hexproof, and Protection, it's going to be incredibly hard to kill. In a similar way, there's Soul Flayer, which has Delve. If a creature card with flying was exiled with Soul Flayer's Delve ability, Soul Flayer has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So pretty much the same, except minus that protection. So yeah, if you delve away creatures that were hard to deal with, this is going to be really hard to deal with. Next up, some honorable mentions that are kind of cheating because they're not creatures. Let's talk about Mutavault and Smuggler's Copter. Mutavault is a land that can turn into a creature. So because of that, this can basically get around any kind of a board wipe that's not at instant speed. And the same can be said for Smuggler's Copter and all other vehicles, which are not creatures unless they're crewed. Now, obviously, again, these technically aren't creatures, but they're on this list, and they're technically not as tough as other things, so why'd I mention them? Well, I thought I'd just bring them up, okay? Anyways, that's all I've got for you today on this list of hardest creatures to kill. I hope you enjoyed this episode in seeing some of the toughest creatures in Magic. When these creatures are on your side, it's great. But when they're not, well, best of luck to you. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again, and have a good one.